Tonight is New Year's Eve, a night when people celebrate, make wishes, and believe they're safe. But for some, midnight didn't bring a new beginning. It brought silence. The stories you're about to hear are not legends. They are real experiences shared by people who survived New Year's Eve, and by some who didn't. Turn off the lights. Keep your eyes open, because once the clock hits midnight, there's no turning back.
This happened on New Year's Eve back in 2017. I'm from Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, and I was flying home after finishing up a semester at the University of Rochester. I had to stay at school a week after the semester ended for personal reasons, so I unfortunately spent Christmas relatively alone. The flight itself was fine, but I'd already been in a sour mood before I even boarded the plane. I'm a big Browns fan, and as I was at the airport, the Browns lost their final game of the regular season to go 0-16, completely winless. And as a lifelong fan, it was a special kind of misery. I think we were the first team to go winless since like the 80s or something. To top it off, my flight was delayed, which ruined my family's plans for the night. Originally, we were all supposed to drive to my cousin's house together for a New Year's Eve party and stay the night. But because of the delay, my parents decided to leave early, taking the main car. I was stuck driving the spare car alone. My mom tried to make it up to me by leaving Vera, our golden retriever, behind to keep me company. I wasn't thrilled about making the trip solo, but Vera was always good company. I figured I'd make the most of it. By the time my Uber dropped me off from the airport, it was creeping on 10 o'clock. I didn't even bother unpacking, I just jammed all my stuff in the car, got Vera, locked up the house, and got on the road. The drive itself wasn't anything special, just miles of Ohio backroads winding through empty fields and patches of forest. There wasn't much snow on the grounds, just a light dusting, which was nice since I hated driving in the snow. It was pitch black dark though. The only light came from my headlights and the occasional farmhouse with its porch light glowing faintly in the distance. About halfway into the trip, Vera started whining. At first, I thought she just wanted attention, but then she stood up, pacing in the passenger seat. That's when I realized she needed to go to the bathroom. I groaned, knowing there wasn't much else I could do but pull over. The next clearing I came across was small, barely enough space for the car, but it would have to do. I remembered noting to myself how dark it really was out there. If not for the patches of white snow here and there, I probably wouldn't have been able to see into the woods at all. I jammed my hands in my pockets and tried my best not to freeze to death. Vera didn't seem to care about the cold or the darkness. Classic golden retriever. I let her out, not even bothering to leash her. She sniffed around the edge of the trees, taking her sweet time. She didn't wander far, just enough to do her business. And that's when I heard it. All of a sudden, a loud crashing sound echoed from somewhere in the woods. It wasn't just a branch breaking, it was heavier and deliberate, like someone or something was moving through the trees. I literally jumped from how loud it was. Imagine a grown man sprinting through the forest. That's genuinely what it sounded like. I scanned the darkness, squinting to make out anything, but it was too dark to see beyond the first few trees. Before I could react, Vera bolted directly into the woods. It was some worst nightmare type stuff, I'm telling you. She disappeared into the trees, and I lost sight of her in mere seconds. I yelled her name over and over, but she didn't come back. At that point, my heart was racing, and it started getting hard to breathe. The cold didn't help matters. I couldn't leave her out there, that wasn't an option. Without thinking, I ran into the woods blindly, yelling for her to come back. I didn't want to think about what she was chasing after, so I just ran, letting the adrenaline take over. The only light to aid me was my dim phone flashlight and the thin layer of snow on the ground. It was so dark I was practically running into the trees. I kept running, praying I'd find her before she caught up to whatever was in there. I ran until my lungs gave out from the cold, forcing me to take a break. After nearly falling over from exhaustion, I leaned up against a tree and felt myself about to break down. I honestly didn't know what to do. And then finally, I saw her. She was crouched low and shivering, walking slowly toward me. Her tail was tucked tightly between her legs. I had never seen her like that before. I dropped to my knees and embraced her. Relief flooded through me. She pressed against me and I could feel her body trembling. Something had terrified her. That's when I snapped back to reality and realized how serious the situation was. We were still in the middle of the woods, and there was still something out there. I sprung up from my position and told Vera to follow me. This time she obeyed and stuck by my side like her life depended on it. We started back to the car, but I had no idea if I was going the right way. As if things weren't bad enough, I damn near jumped out of my skin when I heard crashing from behind me. I didn't think, I just started running. Vera darted ahead of me and I followed her, praying I didn't trip. The crashing sound didn't stop this time. It seemed like it was following us. I can't even tell you how scared I was in that moment. I genuinely felt like I was going to die. By some miracle, Vera led me straight back to the car, and I practically threw her inside before slamming the door shut. As I was jumping in the driver's seat, I glanced back towards the woods and my stomach dropped. There were 3 figures standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. I jammed the keys in the ignition and floored it out of there. I didn't stop, I didn't even slow down. I was still in shock. It wasn't until I'd driven a few miles that I noticed Vera was bleeding. I started panicking as I realized there was a cut just below her shoulder blade. Someone had stabbed her. I slammed on the brakes and ran around the car to the trunk. My mom always kept a first aid kit in every car, and for once, her insistence on being overly prepared paid off. I cleaned Vera's cut as best I could and wrapped it in gauze. She whimpered and I worried that I was hurting her, but I knew I was doing the right thing. For the first time since the whole sequence had started, I felt myself begin to relax. It was over. I tried not to think about it for the rest of the drive, but I was just so shell-shocked that something like that had happened to me. I ended up not telling my parents or relatives. I don't know why. It just felt like one of those things you keep to yourself. What I'm about to tell you is something I still think about often, especially during this time of year. This happened on New Year's Eve a few years ago. I was driving to my parents' house to celebrate the new year with them. They live a few hours away in upstate Pennsylvania, so I'd left in the late afternoon, figuring I'd get there with plenty of time to spare. The drive was supposed to be simple. I'm the type who really enjoys long drives, so a nice peaceful drive would give me some much needed time to think. But the weather had other plans. The snow started falling about an hour into my drive. At first it was light, just flurries dusting the windshield. Nothing to worry about. I thought the snowfall was actually quite pretty, but I'm pretty sure I jinxed myself. The further I drove, the harder the snow came down. It just kept falling and falling until I was literally in the middle of an honest-to-God blizzard. The highway turned slick and visibility dropped to almost nothing. My car, a little sedan, isn't exactly great in snow, so when the tires started slipping on even the smallest hills, I knew I had to pull over. There was no point in risking my life. It was my own fault for not planning out the drive better. I found a spot on the shoulder, far enough off the road to avoid passing cars, not that there were many. I texted my parents about my situation, and they seemed worried sick. I tried to reassure them that everything would be okay, but I honestly wasn't too sure about that myself. I figured I'd wait out the worst of the storm, hoping it would just ease up, but the snow didn't let up. In fact, it only seemed to get worse from that point. It just kept coming, piling up around the car and on the road ahead. After an hour or so, it became clear I wasn't going anywhere that night. My dad offered to try and get out to me, but I told him that that was a death wish. I told him that if the snow didn't let up, I'd call the police, which he begrudgingly accepted as a decent solution. I really didn't want to call the police, and I didn't have AAA either, so that wasn't an option. I told myself the storm would have to let up eventually, and I decided that if it didn't by the time I got tired, I'd call the police. The thought of spending the night in the car made me uneasy. I didn't want to run out of gas trying to keep warm, and I was worried about killing the battery if I kept the lights or heat on too long. I sat there, turning the engine on and off every so often, trying to conserve what I could. The wind howled outside. I was starting to feel the weight of the isolation when I looked at my rear view and saw headlights cutting through the storm from behind me. I literally wanted to jump for joy. A snowplow pulled up beside me. I was saved. I rolled down the window as the driver leaned out of his. He was an older guy, maybe in his late 50s. He looked nice. He was wearing a thick jacket and had a black knit hat that was pulled down over his ears. I remember thinking his face was really wrinkly, if that makes sense. It looked weathered, like he had spent decades in harsh conditions. I expected him to say something, but he just stared at me for what seemed like an unusual amount of time. Eventually, he spoke, asking me if I was okay. He had a really gruff voice, definitely a smoker, and it was honestly kind of off-putting. I told him that I didn't think my car could handle the conditions, trying to be friendly but also keep my voice steady. He nodded, saying that I wouldn't get far in a storm like this, especially with the car I had. He paused for a few moments, as if he were considering what to say. I watched his eyes scan my back seat, like he was looking for something. I was just about to respond when he offered to give me a ride. I hesitated. I didn't know him, and yeah, he seemed a little strange, but he struck me as a genuine guy. Plus, staying put with my car all night would have been stupid. I asked him if he could drive me to where I was going, and he said it would be no problem. I then asked him what I should do about my car, to which he shrugged his shoulders and said, "Leave it." After a moment, I agreed. I grabbed my bag and climbed into the cab of the plow. At first, the warmth was comforting. I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease as I settled into the seat. He asked me where I was headed, and I told him about my parents' house. I gave him directions, and he nodded again, but didn't say much after that. The silence wasn't awkward, but as the minutes passed, I started to feel more and more uncomfortable. That's when I noticed something odd. He wasn't driving in the direction of my parents' house. I knew because the navigation was literally pointing in the opposite direction. I mean, we were on a local highway. There were only 2 ways to go. I tried my best to sound calm and asked him if we were going the right way in the most normal tone I could muster. I don't think I did a good job, though, because I could feel his demeanor slightly change with my question. Without looking at me, he told me we were taking a short detour and that the back roads would be better than the highway. I didn't know the area well enough to argue, but something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. We drove a little longer, and he did in fact get off the highway and start driving along some back road. At least the GPS said we were heading in the right direction. So I thought I was just being paranoid. Something in my gut was still telling me he was off though, so I started looking around the cab more closely. There were red flags everywhere. Empty liquor bottles rolled on the floor near his feet. There were torn up maps stuffed into the side pockets, and I caught a glimpse of a knife wedged between the seats. I felt my heart start pounding. You know that feeling where your heart just starts beating like crazy and you're worried other people can hear it? That's what was happening to me. By that time, I was also positive we weren't going the right way. The GPS kept recalibrating because he missed turn after turn, not even looking at it. I was panicking. As we continued driving, I spotted a house in the distance. It was the only one I'd seen for miles. I had to act. It felt like a lifeline. I waited until we got closer, took a deep breath, grabbed the door handle, and then kicked the door open as hard as I could. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I slammed into the ground and felt my leg flare up with pain. I didn't care though. I got to my feet and started running toward the house. The man shouted something at me, and I glanced back to see him fumbling for something in the glove box, probably going for a gun for all I knew. I didn't look back again. I sprinted through the snow, trying not to slip until I reached the house. I pounded on the door, screaming for help. A man and woman opened it, and they basically pulled me inside. I collapsed onto the floor, trying to catch my breath. I told them what had just happened, and they didn't ask questions. They just called the police. By the time the cops arrived, the snowplow was gone. They said they'd keep an eye out and search the area, but in that storm, finding him was unlikely. They offered to give me a ride to my parents' house, and even helped me call someone to tow my car. I was beyond grateful. My dad was furious once he found out, and I haven't driven in the snow since. I always think about what might have happened had I not jumped out of the car when I did. I've never been one for parties, even in college. I got sick of the whole going out culture pretty quickly, and I found that I always had more fun doing something meaningful with a few close friends. I'm from a rural area, northwestern Ontario. This happened a couple years ago. Ever since I was a kid, my dad and his buddies had a New Year's Eve tradition of going ice fishing while everyone else was celebrating the New Year however they celebrated. My mom wasn't really in the picture, and we didn't have much extended family, so I grew up spending New Year's Eve on a frozen lake in the frigid cold with my dad, his brother, my brother, and my dad's friends. My dad isn't around anymore, and my brother moved to Chicago a number of years ago, but I still try and go ice fishing as much as possible, especially as a way to celebrate New Year's Eve. I'm not really sure why, I just feel like I have some kind of obligation to keep the tradition going. My two best friends, Nate and Trevor, are pretty rugged guys themselves. You know the type, those burly, lumberjack-looking dudes that seem more in touch with wilderness than society. That's honestly how I describe myself too. Anyway, the three of us tried to keep the tradition alive as best we could, which was great because spending New Year's Eve alone would be depressing as hell. Nate was the one driving that day. His truck was perfect for the job. Big tires, four-wheel drive, and enough room in the back for all of our gear. We'd packed everything we needed: rods, tip-ups, bait, a sled to haul everything, and a small pop-up shelter to shield us from the worst of the cold. The forecast predicted a clear night, but in Ontario, you never trust the weather reports entirely. We were prepared for anything. At least, we thought we were. The lake we were heading to wasn't a well-known spot, and that's what we loved about it. It was tucked away, surrounded by thick trees with a surface that stayed frozen solid even in the milder parts of winter. It wasn't a place you'd stumble across unless you knew exactly where to look. As Nate navigated the snowy back roads, the excitement started to build. There's something about the quiet stillness of ice fishing. Just you, your friends, and the promise of the catch. Definitely beats drinking beer after beer at some random bar. As we pulled up to park near the trailhead, I noticed someone standing nearby. He was a few yards away, bundled up in heavy winter gear, but something about him didn't feel right. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at our truck. At first, I thought maybe he was just a fellow angler sizing us up, but then I saw him glance down at his phone, then back at us, then back at his phone again. For some reason, it didn't feel casual. I don't really know how to explain it. It just felt off. I muttered to my friends that guy was creeping me out. The two of them looked up. Trevor shrugged his shoulders and Nate nodded but didn't say anything. We were about to start unloading when the man suddenly rushed towards us, waving his arms wildly. I rolled the window down to hear what he was saying. He started screaming that we needed to come help him immediately and that his buddy had just fallen through the ice. He pointed at his phone, saying the other guy they were with just told him. He sounded frantic, and his desperation was definitely real. We didn't even think. Trevor opened his door, and then we were all out following the man as he took off down the trail toward the lake. We didn't stop to grab anything, not even our coats. The urgency in his voice was enough to override any second thoughts. The man was practically sprinting, and we had to jog to keep up. As we got closer to the lake, I started to notice something that didn't sit right. He wasn't leading us to the usual fishing spots. Instead, we were heading toward a more remote part of the shoreline, away from where the ice was thickest. I was about to stop following, but it was too late. They appeared in view before we could do anything. Two more men standing near the edge of the lake. They weren't dressed for fishing, and they weren't moving. They were just standing there, waiting. I glanced down at their hands. They were both armed. My blood ran cold. One of them yelled at us to stop right there as we approached. He raised his gun and pointed it directly at me. I honestly can't describe the feeling that you get when someone points a gun at you. I hope no one ever has to experience what I felt that day. My heart dropped as the man we'd been following turned to face us, a smirk creeping across his face. We'd been set up. The second guy demanded Nate's keys, along with everything we had on our persons. We didn't really have a choice. These guys didn't seem like they were messing around. Nate reached into his pocket and tossed the truck keys to the man, and the three of us emptied our pockets. I tried to hang on to my phone, but one of the men told me phones too. Nate said his was in the car, which they laughed about. I've never been more furious in my life. How could we have been so foolish? I clenched my fists, wishing those guys weren't armed. I would have taken all of them on. Within moments, they grabbed everything and walked us back up the path at gunpoint before one of the men sped off in Nate's car. The other two backed away into the woods, presumably to their own vehicle. I debated following them, but I figured that wouldn't be much help. We stood there for a moment, shivering, before Nate pulled out his phone. I knew he had lied about it being in the car. I honestly don't know what we would have done had he not thought quickly on his feet. Somehow, we still had service. He called the police, explaining everything as calmly as he could. The dispatcher told us to stay put, and we huddled together for warmth as we waited for help to arrive. I was still so unbelievably angry. Nate was the worst, though. He kept kicking nearby trees and cursing at the top of his lungs. There was nothing Trevor or I could do to calm him down. The whole thing had happened so fast. I was honestly still processing it all. Why the hell would there be people out in the middle of nowhere on New Year's Eve of all days? It didn't make any sense. I'll skip all the boring details. The cops took an official report and were gracious enough to drive us all back to Trevor's house, which was the closest. As you might expect, Nate's car was never located, and those people were never caught. The three of us still can't believe what had happened. Trevor thinks we just stumbled into the wrong people at the wrong time, that they weren't planning on robbing us, but we just so happened to be the perfect targets. I think that's possible, but it still feels so unlikely. Who just springs a trap on some random people in the spur of the moment? But it also wouldn't make sense for them to be waiting for us at such a secluded spot. They had no guarantee anyone would show up. I really have no idea what to make of this whole incident. I'm using a voice transcription thing on my phone since I don't really like typing and I'm not the best with words. This was, God, I don't even know, like 7 or 8 years ago now. Maybe 6, I'm not really sure. My life's been a bit chaotic since then, so my head's filled with all sorts of memories and whatnot. Anyway, this was New Year's Eve back when I was still dating my ex, Duda. We were on our way back from a party when everything went down. It must have been well after midnight because I remember being extremely tired. Also, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that driving on New Year's Eve isn't exactly the smartest decision, but we had no choice. The party had been at Duda's friend's place, but we were late additions to the guest list, so there weren't any sleeping arrangements left for us. The drive was actually pretty long, maybe 30 minutes give or take. The roads were pretty much empty, which I remember being grateful for. It had snowed earlier that day, so the streets were icy as hell. And honestly, the last thing I needed was to be dodging traffic on top of everything else. Duda was half asleep in the passenger seat. I had the heat cranked and some random rock playlist going just to keep myself from drifting off. You know how it is. We were maybe 10 minutes from her place when it happened. Okay, so I don't even know how to describe what I saw. One second the road ahead was completely empty, and the next there was just a woman, literally standing in the middle of the street. And she wasn't like crossing or anything. She was just there, facing my car like she'd been waiting for us or something. I remember my brain just not being able to process it fast enough. I was already slamming on the brakes before I even realized what I was looking at. And then I realized she was holding a knife. It was down by her side, this massive kitchen knife, the kind you'd use to like carve a turkey or something. My headlights were hitting her full on, and I could see her face was all twisted up, like she was crying or screaming, or maybe both. It was sickly. I don't think I've ever reacted faster in my life. I yanked the wheel to the right to avoid hitting her, but the second I did, she lunged at the car. I heard the impact before I understood what happened. Despite the chaos of everything unfolding so quickly, I knew exactly what happened. She had swung the knife at my car as I passed. Even though I had avoided her, The swerve combined with the ice was just too much. I felt the tires lose grip, and suddenly we were spinning. Duda had woken up by then and immediately started freaking out. I was gripping the wheel like it would actually do something, but there was nothing I could do. The car was not under my control. We spun a full 180 and were basically facing the other direction by the time the car stopped. After recovering from the shock of almost dying, I looked up through the windshield and felt sick all over again, because we were now facing the direction we'd come from, which meant we were facing the woman. She was maybe 30 feet away, still holding the knife, illuminated by my headlights like something out of a horror movie, and she was limping toward us, like she was trying to move fast, but she was clearly injured. She was also screaming something I couldn't understand, just this guttural, incoherent noise that sounded more like an animal than a person. It was, and probably still is, the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed with my own 2 eyes. I remember Duda yelling at me to do something, but I was just frozen. I couldn't look away from this woman lurching toward us. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and her hair was all matted and wild. I don't know if she was on drugs or having some kind of mental breakdown or what, but there was nothing behind her eyes. There was nothing there. It honestly looked like she was a dead person walking. She was maybe 15 feet away when my survival instincts finally kicked in. I threw the car in drive and slammed on the gas. The tires spun on the ice for this terrifying second before catching, and we started moving. I thought we were clear, like I thought that was it. But of course, I was wrong. I don't know how she moved that fast. Like 1 second she was in front of the car, and the next she was on it. She threw herself onto the hood, and I felt the whole car shudder from the impact. Duda was screaming, I was cursing, and this woman was clinging to the hood of my car with one hand while stabbing the windshield with the other, just like over and over again. I felt like she was trying to get into my car and kill me. I felt like I was gonna die. I couldn't see or think. I just started swerving the wheel back and forth as hard as I could. The woman was sliding around on the hood, but she wouldn't let go. She was still screaming that horrible wordless scream, and her face was inches from the glass, and I swear to God, her eyes were locked on mine the entire time. On the 3rd or 4th swerve, she finally lost her grip. I watched her roll off the side of the hood and hit the pavement really hard before sliding into the shoulder. The car fishtailed again, but I managed to keep it under control this time. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her lying there. She wasn't moving. Part of me wanted to stop. I know that sounds insane given what just happened, but I thought maybe I'd killed her. Like maybe she was just some mentally ill person who needed help, and I just killed her. Duda grabbed my arm and told me not to stop. She was shaking and kept saying we needed to go, that it wasn't our problem, that we couldn't get involved. I said we should at least call the police, but she also shut that down immediately. She said the cops would blame us since we've been drinking, and that there was no way they'd believe our story. She said we'd get arrested or something. Looking back, none of that made sense, but Duda had this way of making everything sound urgent yet logical in the moment. She was always like that, very persuasive and borderline manipulative, honestly. I left that woman on the side of the road, drove Duda home, and didn't tell anyone. I still feel sick thinking about it. The damage to my car wasn't even that bad, just the cracked windshield, the knife marks on my driver's side window, and a few scratches on the hood. Surprisingly, there wasn't even any blood on the car. I got it fixed like a week later, but the guilt stuck with me for months. I kept checking the local news, waiting to see a story about a body found on that road or a missing woman or something, but nothing ever came up. I don't know if that made me feel better or worse, honestly. Part of me wonders if she got up after we left and just walked off into the woods or something. Part of me doesn't want to know. The thing that really messed with me, though, was Duda. She acted like nothing happened. Like within a couple days, she was back to her normal self, making plans, going out with friends, whatever. I brought it up once and she got annoyed with me, telling me I was being dramatic and that we did what we had to do. I remember just staring at her and thinking like, how can you be so cold about this? A woman tried to kill us, and we might have killed her, and you're willing to just forget about the whole thing? We broke up a few months later for unrelated reasons. Well, mostly unrelated, but I'd be lying if I said that night didn't change how I saw her. Maybe I'm the crazy one, but an experience like that is not something you can easily forget, let alone move on from in 2 days. I might have ended someone's life that night. That deranged woman might have ended my life that night. That's not something you can just forget about. I went to Cal Berkeley for undergrad. It's where I met one of my closest friends, a guy named Garrett. His real name is Guo, but when we first met freshman year, he introduced himself by his quote, American name, and it just stuck. He's originally from Hong Kong, came to the States to study computer science, and is genuinely one of the smartest people I've ever known. After grad, we went our separate ways geographically. I moved to New York for work, and he went back to Hong Kong for the same reason. We're both in our late 20s now, both doing pretty well career-wise, both single. We try to see each other at least once or twice a year, whether that's him flying out to visit me or me taking a trip to Asia. I know it's pretty fortunate to be able to travel so frequently, so I never take that for granted. This incident happened last New Year's Eve, and I still think about it constantly. I've told a few people, but no one really knows what to make of it, nor do I. Oh, by the way, Hong Kong is 13 hours ahead of New York. That means when it's midnight in Hong Kong, it's only 11 a.m. on December 31st in New York City. Garrett celebrates both the regular New Year and the Chinese New Year, so he was out partying that night, same as me, just half a day earlier. I spent New Year's Eve with my two closest friends in the city, Rylan and Ari. We started at Rylan's apartment for drinks, then made our way to this rooftop party in Williamsburg that one of Aris's coworkers had invited us to. It was honestly pretty fun and decently upscale, at least for Brooklyn. Around 11:30 or so, I started talking to this girl. She was standing near the bar by herself, and I honestly just walked up and introduced myself. We hit it off immediately. She had this energy about her that I can't really describe. Super easy to talk to, funny, engaging. We talked for maybe 5 minutes before she pulled me onto the dance floor. Her name was Maitreyi. I remember asking her to repeat it because I'd never heard it before. She laughed and told me everyone just calls her Maitri because that's basically how you pronounce it. I thought that was kind of charming. She pulled out a pen and spelled it for me on my hand just in case I, quote, forgot. Things escalated quickly from there. We danced, talked some more, and kissed at midnight. By around 12:30, she asked if I wanted to get out of there, so we grabbed an Uber back to my place in the East Village. I'll skip the next few details, but I will say it was a great night. We stayed up talking for a while afterward, and I learned a decent amount about her. Here's everything I remember. She was originally from San Diego. She was an artist, more specifically a painter, and she mentioned she used to do graffiti and murals before transitioning to more traditional stuff. Her middle name was Mia, which was also the name of one of her cats. The other cat was named Cosmo. Her birthday was April 28th. Her best friend growing up was from some tiny town in Germany called Hillesheim. Her dad was a patent lawyer. These are random details, I know, but they become important later, trust me. At some point, she mentioned her clothes smelled like the bar, so I threw them in the wash for her. She borrowed one of my t-shirts to sleep in. We fell asleep not long after that. I can't remember really what time it was. When I woke up the next morning, she was gone. At first, I didn't think much of it. People leave after hookups, it happens. I figured she slipped out early to avoid any awkwardness, which was fine. But then I started noticing things that didn't add up. The first thing was my apartment door. I have a standard lock that you can only lock from the outside with a key, meaning it doesn't auto-lock. When I got up to use the bathroom, I noticed the lock was still engaged, which meant either she had somehow locked it from the outside without a key, or she'd never left at all. But both of those were impossible scenarios. I checked the rest of the apartment. My place isn't big. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, a small kitchen. There's no second exit. The windows also don't open more than a few inches. I even searched my closet like an idiot, as if she might be hiding in there, but she wasn't. The impossibility of the situation made me start questioning my sanity. I started wondering whether my drunken state had caused me to imagine the whole encounter entirely. I kept pacing around my apartment frantically, as if she would just appear out of some corner and reset everything back to normal. Her clothes were also gone from the dryer, which added to the mystery, and the shirt I lent her was nowhere in sight, proving that she had slept over. But she was nowhere. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what the hell had happened, but no explanation I could come up with made sense. To make matters worse, I soon realized that I never got her number, or any form of contact at all for that matter. For the rest of the day, I tried to piece together everything I could remember about her. The details I listed earlier, that's pretty much everything. I kept repeating them in my head because I knew I'd forget eventually. Later that afternoon, I randomly felt compelled to call Garrett. I don't know why exactly. It was just a super bizarre impulse that just kind of came out of nowhere. It wasn't like I had anything specific to tell him. I just had this weird urge to ring him. We caught up for a bit, talked about work, talked about our respective New Year's celebrations, the usual stuff. He seemed a little off, though. Eventually, I asked him what was wrong. He sighed and told me he met a girl the night before. They'd hit it off, gone back to his place, and she left the next morning without saying goodbye. No number or contact or anything, and he was bummed about it. I laughed and told him the exact same thing happened to me. Like, the exact same thing. But here's where things get really freaky. He told me her name was Maitreyi, like my tree. I felt this weird chill run through me. I asked him to describe her, and he started listing details. Everything matched up almost perfectly. Her birthday was April 28th, she was from San Diego, a painter who used to do graffiti. I cut him off before he could finish, and asked if she had a cat named Mia. That's when he went a little silent before saying yes. You could imagine what happened next. The two of us spent like 15 minutes just listing as many things as we could remember about her, and all of it lined up. It was actually kind of horrifying. It gets worse though. He actually had pictures with her, something I didn't have, and he showed them to me. It was the exact same girl, I'm 100% certain. We tried to rationalize it, but every explanation we could come up with was ridiculous. And here's the thing. Hong Kong is 13 hours ahead of New York. Garrett met her around 11 p.m. on December 31st, Hong Kong time. I met her at around 11:30 p.m. on December 31st, New York time. That's roughly a 12-hour difference, but a flight from Hong Kong to New York takes at least 15 hours, and it's usually longer, more like 16 or 17. Even if she had somehow gotten on a plane the second she left Garrett's apartment, she couldn't have made it to that rooftop party in Williamsburg in time. The math didn't work. It was literally impossible, and even if we ignore the flight time somehow, how would she have known to go to that exact party? How would she have ended up talking to me? How would she have known to use the same name, the same details, the same everything? I still don't have answers to any of these questions. Neither does Garrett. We've talked about it probably a dozen times since then, and we always end up at the same place. We don't know what happened, and we probably never will. Neither one of us saw that girl again. The thing that messes with me the most is how real it all felt. I know for a fact that she wasn't some drunken hallucination. I literally talked to her for hours. She slept in my bed, and then she just vanished from a locked apartment with no other exits. Garrett and I don't really know what to do with this. We've both tried looking her up online, but Maitreyi with no last name and only vague details about being an artist from San Diego doesn't exactly narrow things down. We found nothing. New Year's Eve is fast approaching, which is why this is all fresh in my head again. Usually, the insanity of crazy, unexplainable experiences fades over time, but for some reason, it feels like the opposite for me. The more time passes, the freakier it is to think about the possibility that I may have slept with a ghost on New Year's Eve. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I don't have a better explanation for what happened. This story is one of my dad's. Before he had kids, my dad and my mom used to travel a lot. He had made some smart business moves in his mid-20s, so he had money to spend and the free time to spend it. They were both big skiers, but the only good skiing that was accessible to New York City was in Vermont. So over the years, they actually purchased a few lodges up there. The first one was in Ludlow. They bought it from some guy named Mr. Black who lived on West End Avenue in the city. It was this old black shuttered place that my dad always referred to as the Black House, partly because of the shutters and partly because of the previous owner's last name. They'd sell quarter shares to friends and cycle things out every few months to help cover the costs. They kept the place for a few years before eventually switching to a second property. The second lodge was about halfway between Ludlow and Rutland, right along Route 100 in what locals called the Lake District. There are like 5 lakes in a row along that stretch of road, and the house sat right on the edge of one of them. My dad's friend Victor and his wife Lisa went in on that one with them. Victor and my dad had been close since college, and the 4 of them would take trips up there together pretty regularly. This happened one New Year's Eve. I can't remember exactly what year, but it was obviously before I was born. Lisa and my mom were away for a friend's wedding or something. I can't really remember the specifics, but it's not that important. What matters is that Victor and my dad decided to take a trip up to Vermont by themselves to ring in the new year. It was the night of December 31st. The 2 of them were upstairs cracking a few beers and just catching up. The upstairs of that lodge had these full-length windows that looked out over the lake, so they'd sit up there, listen to music, and watch the snow. It was snowing, of course, but not so heavily that you felt trapped. My dad said it was really peaceful that night, one of those nights you share with a good friend where you're both just happy to be far away from everything. They had the radio on, waiting to hear the countdown from Times Square, and then all of a sudden, things got crazy. They were mid-conversation when a huge flash of light came from somewhere across the lake. My dad said his first thought was fireworks, but the flash didn't come from the sky. It came from the ground up, and there was no sound, just the silent, blinding light. Victor stood up and walked over to the window, trying to make something out across the lake. My dad asked what he was looking at, and Victor said he thought he saw something moving out there. It was dark, obviously, but there was enough visibility from the snow on the frozen lake that you could see if you concentrated. So after a few seconds, Victor becomes convinced that there's a person out there. My dad told him that was impossible. There were no houses on that side of the lake. There were no trails, no roads, no anything. It was just pure woods on the other side of the lake. But Victor wasn't having it. He started throwing on his coat and boots, saying he was going to take a look. My dad tried to talk him out of it, but Victor was already halfway down the stairs. My dad grabbed his jacket and followed. The 2 of them burst out onto the back deck, and that's when they heard a voice. A young voice. It sounded like a little boy yelling help over and over again. My dad said it was faint at first, but unmistakable. There was definitely a child screaming for help somewhere out in that frozen lake. It had been well below freezing for months, so the lake was completely solid, no question about it. My dad said they didn't even think twice. They just started walking across. As they got closer, they could make out a figure standing on the ice, maybe 20 or 30 yards off the far bank. It was small, a kid for sure. My dad said he could see the shape of him against the snow. But then there was another flash. My dad said it was so bright he had to shield his face and drop to his knees. He couldn't see anything for a few seconds. Then when he finally opened his eyes and looked up, the kid was just gone. There was nothing out there but empty ice and snow. My dad said that's when he and Victor went from curious to terrified. They turned around and started racing back toward the house. My dad said he was running as fast as he could without slipping. Victor was a few steps ahead of him when he suddenly yelled and pointed up at the house. He was saying there was someone in the window, but not an adult, a little boy. My dad looked up, but didn't see anything besides the dark glass reflecting the snow. Victor swore up and down that he saw a kid standing right there, looking down at them. My dad didn't know what to say. He just wanted to get inside. They made it back to the house and searched the whole place. Every room, every closet, every corner, but there was no one there. The doors were all locked and the windows were shut. There was no sign that anyone had been inside. They decided to call it a night after that. My dad said neither of them really wanted to talk about what happened. They just went to their rooms and tried to sleep. Neither of them had even noticed midnight come and go. My dad woke up twice that night. Both times, he swore he heard a child laughing somewhere in the house. He lay there in the dark, listening, but it always stopped before he could figure out where it was coming from. The thing that freaked him out the most wasn't the kid on the lake or the figure in the snow. It was the light. That bright, blinding flash that came out of nowhere. He said he and Victor talked about it for years afterward, trying to come up with some kind of explanation. Lightning, a flare, fireworks from some distant town, but nothing made sense. There was simply no source. It just happened twice, and then it was over. They ended up cutting the trip short. My dad said they never talked about that night with my mom or Lisa, not until years afterward at least. My dad still doesn't know what happened out there. He's told me this story maybe 3 or 4 times over the years, and every time he gets to the part about the light, he just kind of trails off. I asked him once if he thought it was something supernatural, and he just shrugged and said he didn't know what else it could have been.